What would you do if you found a baby? Abandoned, helpless, and left to fend for herself in the trash. For David, a dedicated policeman, that moment came out of nowhere, shattering the life he thought he had under control. But the twist? This wasn't just any baby. She was a black child, left behind with no trace of her family. The story doesn't end there, though. Years later, a shocking truth comes to light, one that not only challenges everything David believed, but also forces him to confront an uncomfortable reality. As you follow this tale, you'll uncover hidden layers of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. But the real question is, what would you have done in his shoes? And would you be ready for what came next? It was an ordinary day, but for David, a 32-year-old policeman, it became a moment that would change his life forever. As he patrolled a dimly lit alleyway, something caught his eye, a faint, muffled sound from a trash bin. His heart raced, his instincts kicked in. Carefully lifting the lid, he found a sight he never expected: a baby. She was wrapped in nothing but a tattered cloth, skin dark as night, and eyes barely open. No visible injuries, but her shallow breathing hinted at something more serious. Without a second thought, David scooped her up, cradling her fragile body against his chest, feeling her life slipping through his fingers. "I've got you," he whispered, racing to his patrol car, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey he could never have imagined. David's first stop was the nearest hospital, but something inside him knew she needed more than just basic care. The baby, whom he started calling Leah in his mind, was suffering from pneumonia, and time was against them. He decided to take her to one of the top medical clinics in the country, a place known for saving lives, but also notorious for its sky-high bills. "This is going to cost you," the receptionist had warned, eyeing the dirt-streaked officer and the bundle in his arms. "I don't care," David shot back, his voice steady. He wasn't thinking about money, only about saving this little girl's life. And that's how it all began, with a decision made out of love, without hesitation, and with no idea of the consequences that would soon follow. As Leah lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to tubes and machines that beeped rhythmically, David sat by her side, sleepless nights becoming the norm. He couldn't help but wonder how anyone could abandon such a precious life. The doctors were hopeful, but the financial burden grew heavier by the day. Still, David refused to back down. "She's going to make it," he kept telling himself, though the weight of the situation was pressing down on him hard. But little did he know, this was just the beginning of a series of challenges that would shake the foundations of his life. What he hadn't anticipated was the impact this choice would have on his relationship with Lisa, his girlfriend of 5 years. David had always been the kind of man who followed his heart, but this time, that choice came with unexpected consequences. His girlfriend Lisa wasn't just upset. She was furious. "How could you spend our savings like that, David?" she snapped, her voice sharp as a knife. "You didn't even ask me." They'd been building their future together, planning for a home, a family. But now, everything was on the line because of a baby Lisa didn't want. "I didn't have a choice," David replied, trying to stay calm, but the tension between them was thick. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about money. It was about the life they had envisioned together, one that didn't include an abandoned child. And no matter how hard he tried to explain, Lisa's anger only grew. Days turned into weeks, and the arguments became a routine. Lisa didn't hold back, her resentment boiling over. "Why are you so attached to her? She's not even yours!" she yelled one night, slamming the door behind her. David's heart sank. He had never seen this side of her before, the bitterness, the coldness. And deep down, he realized she wouldn't change her mind. The baby, Leah, had become a wedge between them, driving them apart day by day. They fought over everything now, from finances to future plans, but it was always Leah at the center of it all. Lisa saw her as a burden, while David saw her as a blessing. And eventually, something had to give. The breakup wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful unraveling of the life they once shared. Lisa moved out, leaving behind an empty apartment and a heartbroken David. "I just can't do this," she had said, her voice quieter than ever before. But the words still cut deep. For David, it was a devastating blow. He had lost the woman he thought he would marry, and now he was left with nothing but an enormous pile of medical bills and a baby he barely knew. But as he sat in the quiet apartment, Leah's soft breathing reminding him she was still there, something inside him shifted. This was his new reality, and as much as it hurt, he knew he couldn't turn back. Little did he know, the hardest trials were yet to come, and they wouldn't just test his love, they would test his very livelihood. Losing Lisa was already a devastating blow, but what came next felt like a stab in the back that David never saw coming. It wasn't enough for her to just leave. Lisa seemed determined to destroy him, to rip away every shred of dignity he had left. "He's unstable," Lisa whispered venomously to David's boss. "Honestly, I don't know if he's fit to stay on the force." And so, without warning, rumors started to spread like wildfire. David, who had dedicated years to honorable service, was blindsided when his superior called him in for a talk. The false accusations were absurd, but the damage was done. "I'm sorry, David, but we can't take any risks with your position," his boss said, unable to meet the eyes of the man who, until then, had been a pillar of respect. In the blink of an eye, the career David had worked so hard to build was ripped away from him. He went home, clutching the termination letter, his heart crushed and his mind stuck on a single question. How could she do this to me? David sat in the living room, his eyes empty, while the bills piled up in front of him. He held Leah in his arms, the only source of comfort amidst the chaos Lisa had unleashed. "I'll take care of you, my love, I promise," he whispered, more to himself than to the baby who smiled, blissfully unaware of her father's suffering. But the truth was, David was falling apart. The money he had saved with so much sacrifice was quickly running out, and each day felt more unbearable. Lisa hadn't just taken his peace. She had left him with nothing, no job, no reputation, no future. "She destroyed my life," he thought, his chest tightening with anger. Just when David felt he was on the verge of breaking, Anna, Leah's doctor, offered her help. "You're not alone in this, David," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. But even she didn't know how deep he had sunk, or what was still to come. David's world had crumbled around him. With no job, no Lisa, and mounting debts, he was barely holding on. Every day felt like a test of his endurance, and his love for Leah was the only thing keeping him afloat. "I don't know how we're going to make it, but I won't give up on you," he whispered to her one night, as she lay asleep in her crib. There were moments of doubt, where the weight of his choices seemed too heavy to bear. The rent was late, and groceries were scarce, but somehow, he always found a way to make it through another day. He picked up odd jobs where he could, but it was never enough. Still, whenever Leah smiled up at him, something inside him reignited. A quiet determination to keep fighting for her, no matter the cost. Anna, the doctor who had been with him since that fateful day, saw his struggle firsthand. "David, you don't have to do this alone," she said softly, after seeing him stretch every dollar he had. Her offer to help was a lifeline he hadn't expected. "I can't let you do that, Anna," David replied, his pride fighting against the reality of his situation. But Anna was persistent. "It's not just for you, it's for her. Leah deserves a chance, and so do you." Reluctantly, David accepted, her kindness bringing a brief sense of relief amidst the chaos. He didn't know it then, but Anna's presence in their lives would soon become something much more than just financial support. Even with Anna's help, the weight of everything David was dealing with began to take its toll. The quiet nights after Leah had fallen asleep were the hardest, when the loneliness crept in, and the silence reminded him of all he had lost. Why did it have to be this way? He would mutter to himself, feeling the sting of everything falling apart. But he couldn't dwell on it for long. The next day always came, and with it, another chance to move forward. Little did he know, the battles ahead were about to get even harder, as someone from Leah's past was about to reappear, threatening everything David had fought so hard to protect. Just when David thought things couldn't get worse, Leah's biological mother, Kelly, showed up. "I want my baby back," she declared, her eyes filled with both guilt and determination. David stood there in shock. "You abandoned her," he replied, his voice low but steady. Kelly didn't flinch. "I didn't have a choice. I was trapped in an abusive marriage. I had nothing," she explained, tears streaming down her face. As much as David tried to empathize, his protective instincts kicked in. "Leah is my daughter now. I've raised her, cared for her, loved her. You can't just walk back into her life like this." But Kelly wasn't backing down, and soon the matter was taken to court, a legal battle that would determine Leah's future. The courtroom was tense. David sat beside Anna, who had become not only a friend, but his biggest supporter through it all. "We'll get through this," she whispered to him, squeezing his hand. Kelly's story of abuse and hardship tugged at the judge's heart, but David's devotion to Leah was undeniable. "She's my whole world," David said during his testimony, his voice cracking with emotion. "I may not be her biological father, but in every way that matters, she's my daughter." As the trial dragged on, it was clear that both sides had a compelling case. The judge's decision would be anything but easy. Anna stepped up in ways David never expected. She not only helped cover the legal fees, but also testified on David's behalf. "He's the only father Leah has ever known," she told the court. "He's given everything to keep her safe and loved." The courtroom fell silent as the judge took everything into consideration: Kelly's tragic past and David's undeniable commitment. In the end, the judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud. "Custody of Leah is granted to David," the judge announced. David let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Kelly's face crumpled, but she nodded in understanding. David had won, but it came at a cost. Little did he know, this victory would pave the way for something unexpected, a new chapter he never saw coming. The courtroom was silent as the judge's words hung in the air. "Custody of Leah is granted to David." David could hardly believe what he was hearing. His heart pounded in his chest, his eyes filled with tears of relief. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He glanced over at Kelly, who sat quietly, her face a mix of sorrow and acceptance. "I'm sorry, Kelly," David whispered, catching her gaze, but she just nodded, understanding that her past decisions had led to this outcome. It wasn't an easy victory. It was a bittersweet moment for everyone involved. But deep down, David knew he had done everything he could to protect the little girl who had come to mean the world to him. Anna, who had been by David's side throughout the entire ordeal, squeezed his hand as the courtroom began to empty. "You did it, David. Leah's yours," she said softly, her smile warm but tired. David, still in shock, couldn't find the right words. "I couldn't have done it without you, Anna," he admitted, his voice breaking. The weight of everything, the legal battle, the financial strain, the emotional toll, was finally starting to lift, and with it came an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the woman who had been his rock. The bond between them had grown stronger with every challenge they faced together, and now there was a new possibility lingering between them. But even as they walked out of the courthouse, David couldn't help but wonder what the future held for both him and Leah. The judge's decision was more than just a legal win. It was a turning point in David's life. The uncertainty that had shadowed his every step for the past year began to fade, replaced by a new sense of hope. As they walked out of the courthouse, Anna turned to him, her eyes reflecting something more than just friendship. "What happens now, David?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her voice. He paused, looking at her, and for the first time in months, he smiled. "I think we start a new chapter," he replied, and though he didn't say it out loud, they both knew that the connection between them was growing into something much more. Life wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, David was ready for whatever came next. With the courtroom battle behind him, and Leah now officially in his care, David felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But what he didn't expect was how quickly things would change after that day. Anna had been his constant support, and over time, their bond deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. "David, I've been thinking," Anna said one evening, as they sat together watching Leah play. "Maybe we could try this. Us. Not just for Leah, but for us." Her voice was soft, uncertain, but hopeful. David looked at her, realizing that he had been feeling the same way for a while now. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They both knew that the love they had built, first for Leah, then for each other, was real. Their relationship blossomed naturally, and before long, David and Anna decided to get married. The ceremony was small and intimate, with Leah as their flower girl, toddling down the aisle with a basket of petals. "I didn't think my life would turn out like this," David confessed to Anna during their vows, his voice thick with emotion.